My name is Yolonda Johnson Simon. I am 71 and I am a retired educator. I was born in Carroll, Illinois. I'm number 11 of 12 children. My parents are Curtis and Mary Johnson. And as far as I can remember, I always lived in the house that we grew up in on 32nd Street. My oldest siblings, the oldest six, are old enough to be my parents. So when my oldest brother died last year at his funeral at 90, I shared with the people there that I remember my mom introducing me to him, his wife, and son. Um, I I grew up in the house with four of us, my three youngest brothers, my three brothers, and myself. There are eight boys, four girls, of course. My mom and dad were awesome. That's the only way I can put it. My mom was as patient and kind as my dad wasn't mean, but he was very firm and opinionated. I'll put it that way. And I enjoyed life. I didn't know I was poor until I went to college because I felt like all that I needed I had. My dad was a trucker and he sold coal. And of course, he always had a dump truck. We generally had two pickups and a car. And he was adamant about everybody in the house needed to know how to drive everything on the yard. So I've probably been driving since I was 12. When someone called for coal, for as young as probably when I was 6, when you could write, you must answer Johnson and Son Coal Company. You must remember the address and how much coal they wanted. If you couldn't write it down, you'd better remember it. That's money from my dad's pocket. That's what he always said. I I only got to meet my paternal grandmother, and she lived in Michigan, but both my parents were from Mississippi. My dad was from Panola County. My mom was from Neshoba County, but they didn't know each other there. And then their families moved to Arkansas, and they didn't know each other there. And then they moved to Southeast Missouri, to Gray Ridge, Missouri, which is where they met at a church. Um, and they had what my dad called a box dance, a box dinner dance. And if the woman offers it to you and you accept it, then you're dating. And of course, he says it was the best thing ever happened to my mom when he accepted it. Anyway, when I saw that question, I was thinking of people in my neighborhood, but the oldest person that I ever knew that I talked to was my great aunt. She actually lived with us for 2 years, and she was from Mississippi also, but she came to live with us when her daughter was sick. And her name was Anna Henson, and she told me what I know about my grandparents and great grandparents. Um, no, she never talked about enslaved people. I never met anybody that I knew talked about enslaved people. It would probably be the civil rights movement, of course. When I was in the 8th grade was when schools were integrated. I my brother, my oldest living brother now, in 1954, Thurgood Marshall actually came to our house with June Shokoloff, who was his helper, I'm assuming, and they were looking for someone to integrate schools. And they wanted, I have a brother named Floyd and a brother named Lloyd, because my mom wanted twins, but they're not twins. And they wanted Floyd because he would have been a freshman. And my dad said, no, he fought too much. But Lloyd is the one that actually went. So he and one other black woman went. Well, he tells me about the 2 years he would have been, so he would have gone his junior and senior years. And he tells about how he didn't encounter problems at Carroll High. He had problems with the students he left from Sumner High because they didn't want him to go. So schools were integrated. I went to an all black school until I was in at the end of 7th grade. They integrated in 8th grade. And in 8th grade, by that time, there was a lot of unrest. I can remember there being something called the White Hats, and they stood on the corners of the main drag in Carroll on Washington, and they had, um, it's like construction hats and a billy club. And it was more, of course, for intimidation. Um, my dad was this far from nuts, and he would always say, you know, don't talk to him, go on and do whatever you want to do. So we didn't ever encounter problems. But the first year I went to high school, that was 8th grade. The first year I was integrated, it was integrated, I was in 8th grade. And in my 8th grade year, you know, like in most schools, they have your high, middle, low classes in your core classes. And in my language arts class, the lady that was the teacher's name was Mrs. Clark. There were 3 black kids in our class. And we came in from lunch that day, and that was, we had the class right after lunch. And she decided that we were doing syllabication. And she had the Bible open in the genealogy in Matthew. And she called the 3 of us up to read. And it was supposed to embarrass us. But I told you my dad was this nut, far from nuts. We read the Bible all the time around the table. And the other 2 people always ate with us on Sundays. So we could do it. She was so mad. She turned beet red. She was so, just sit down, just sit down. That's what I remember about 8th grade, the first thing. And then in math, which I was never really good at math, you know how when you change classes, they give you the little cards from each class. And in math class, the teacher's name was Mr. House, and he gave me a C. My dad said, if C isn't in your name, it shouldn't be on your report card. So we walked home, and, you know, my dad happened to be at home that time at lunch, and I put the cards on. You know, he was looking at everybody's card. He looked at mine and he said, why do you have a C in math? And I said, well, Daddy, Mr. House, part of your grade is from participation, and he can't pronounce my name. He said, how can he not pronounce Yolonda, and he a teacher? So he said, we're going back. I didn't eat lunch that day. He put me in the truck, and we went back. And you know how you go in the school, and you're supposed to check in at the office. My dad didn't. And they said, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Johnson. She said, show me where the room is. We went up the steps. She was at the top of the steps, and Mr. House was sitting at his desk eating lunch. And my dad said, my name is Curtis Johnson. My daughter says she has a C because you can't pronounce her name. And he said, well, it is a little difficult for me. He said, well, repeat after me, Yolonda. And he looked at him real straight. No, repeat after me, Yolonda. He said it. He did it twice. I said, now here, you can change this grade because that was your fault. She needs an A. And then he changed my grade, and we went downstairs, and my dad went in the office. He said, now he put this on this report card, but I know there is a big scale where you put it on there for permanent. I want an A on that one. And I guess it was probably at the end of the year. I think they thought my dad had forgotten, but he went back and they had changed it. So, you know, and then I can remember once we went to high school, everything was very segregated. We didn't have a lunchroom, so we walked home for lunch. And in Carroll, those people that know Carroll we lived on 32nd Street, and they have like this little dividing place in Carroll. So we had to go through there. And because of the unrest that was happening at the Pyramid Courts, they had called the National Guard, and they were going through the streets, and they were really just harassing Black children. And my dad drove his pickup truck. He would just do that just to kind of see what was going on. And when we were going across the street, the police were yelling things out of the window, and my dad turned around and blocked the National Guard's truck. Oh, he got out of the truck and said, now you look at these 3. Now you know them, you will not. And he had ugly words to say with it. He said, you will not. He said, y'all get in the truck. And my friend was with it. It was my 2 brothers, myself, and my friend down the street. And we got in the truck and went home, but nobody ever harassed us anymore. So we saw, my dad was very well known in town. He was very respected. But what I found, I had, I didn't ever have a white friend my whole high school year. I knew them. I was in class with them, but I never had a white friend in high school. Sure. But now, much of what happened was downtown and in the project area. We were not there. And even during the boycotts, my dad believed in the boycott, but he wouldn't let us participate because he said, "I don't want you to be hurt because I kill everybody." So we did not participate in that. I can remember the boycott happening, and Charles Coyne actually went to my church. And so sometimes they would have rallies after morning worship at our church. I was trying to ask my brother, I cannot remember when I was in, I want to say it was my senior year. I worked at the Gym Theater during the boycott. I don't remember how I got that job, but I worked there. I would work Friday night, Saturday afternoon to the evening, and then Sunday afternoon. But very seldom would I see a black person come in. Every now and then someone would. And of course, they had blacks sitting upstairs and the white sat downstairs. Um, I can't remember anything ever happening where the National Guard had any kind of melees uptown. My mom worked at Max Barbecue, which was one block down from where we lived, right across the street from Elias Family Center. And I can remember she worked in the kitchen, and she would always say blacks could go to the window and order food, but they couldn't eat inside. But once they changed the law and they could, when they went inside to eat, they would break every plate where black people ate. But needless to say, even that got to be kind of expensive for them. I can remember going downtown, and this is even before all of the unrest, the boycotting, and all of that thing. After the young man was killed, if you went downtown to the stores, J.J. Blum or Motor Day, whatever the stores were, if you bought something, they didn't want you to try it on. And if you took it back, they didn't want to take it back. And part of the riots and all of that happened because they wanted you to spend money, but they didn't, and they treated you unkindly. You know, that was when I learned about throwing the money on the counter. You know, my mom and dad were adamant about, no, no, if I hand this to you, you hand it back to me. Those kinds of things. I remember those kinds of things happening. I can remember it's the first time, oh, I'm sorry, that I understand people following you. And I was slow. I didn't get, why are you following, but it'd just be black people. They would just be following black people. Those kinds of things I learned in Carroll. I wouldn't have known. That was 54. I would have been a year old. I know this from family history. I don't remember that. And we have pictures actually when he came, and when my brother was ready to graduate, my mom and dad tell about how people would call and say, now he's gone through, but he can't walk across the stage because if he comes across the stage, he's going to be shot. And my dad said, and my mom said, well, that's just fine. Don't let him. Daddy said, nope. He's done the work. Everybody's going, and I'll have my gun. If they shoot, I'm shooting. So he went through and with no problem. My daddy was a real guy. He really was. I can remember one time, I told you my dad was a trucker. He sold coal. And in the summertime, he had a bus where he took people to the field. And my younger brother and I were too young to go, but he and my mom and whoever the other ones that were home would go. And, he would pick people up and they go to Missouri. Generally, it was a farm called Big Oak Farm, I think it was called. Um, But Donnie and I had to go because there was no babysitter. So we would sit on the bus while they went to do whatever it was. I can remember my dad would pick the people up, but then he would come back by the house and pick us up. And this particular time, this young police came and he pulled. Daddy had just gotten in the bus, and he got out of his car. He was on this side of the street. He got out of the car. Daddy was facing this way, going down toward Missouri way. And he got out of the car and with a gun and told my dad to get out. He said, "For what?" He said, "No, you have to get out." And my dad reached over here, pulled up his gun, and he said, "You have an owl head, so do I." He closed the door, drove down to the police station, and I'm sure the little police had called the chief. And by the time we got there, he has a bus full of people. The police chief was outside, and my dad got out. He said, "You better tell this little punk who we're dealing with." He said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson." We went on to the field. Now, I remember that very clearly. Not that I can remember. No, I don't remember any black police officers. Now there might have been, but I don't recall any black police officers. That's not true. That's not true. Mr. J.R. Stokes was, I don't know if he was a deputy. He did something. He was an older guy, and he actually also went to my church. But yeah, I don't know what he did, but he worked at the courthouse and wore a uniform. Mm. The grade school was 1 block away from where I lived. It was on 34th Street. I lived on, or I guess 2 blocks. We lived on 32nd. And it was, we just did regular stuff. I told you in the wintertime, of course, we always had chores. My mom always cooked breakfast, and you didn't have to eat breakfast. But of course, when it wasn't like we never had cereal because, my brothers worked on the truck. So, they needed something that would stick to them. Her thing was you had to get up, you had to make your bed. She said if Jesus could fold his death clothes, you can make your bed when you get up. So we always had to make our bed. That wasn't an option. You didn't have to eat breakfast, but of course, when you smelled the breakfast coming to you, of course you want to. You dressed for school, and we would walk to school. We never rode the bus, even to the high school. Garrison was on 34th. The high school, well, when I went to high school, it was the predominantly white school at that time. And the junior high school was over there also. But when we went to the black junior high school, which was Washington Grade School at one point, we also walked there. And unless daddy was going down that way, you walked to school. And there was no such thing as a backpack. I always try to tell my grandbabies that. We didn't have a backpack. We had chores to do. I can remember you had school clothes and clothes. You took those school clothes off when you came home. And when you came home, the chores that you had to do, and then you immediately had to do your homework, and then you could play. If we watched television, there were those 3 channels, 3, 12, and 6. And my dad was an avid newspaper reader, and the Carroll Evening Citizen was like 4 pages. And my dad only went to 8th grade. And so his phonetic skills were good. And if he was sitting in the living room reading the newspaper while we were watching television, and he got to a word that he didn't know, he would spell it out loud and try to say the word. Even though we were watching television, somebody had better know that word. And so we did. And the interesting thing was that we did. And it's funny, all of us like to read the newspaper. All ones of us in our family like to read the newspaper. So that's generally how our days went. We went to church. My dad was a deacon in the church. My mom was a Sunday school teacher, and she was over the Baptist Training Union. And our church was on 12th Street. I can remember that. And it since isn't there. It imploded in I don't know, a tornado or something. So now that church is now on 36th Street. So yeah, that was generally the way our days went. No problem. Everybody in your neighborhood knew everybody. Um, And of course, you hear this with black people, but it was really true on my block. If you did something wrong, the Moody's, Miss Moody would spank you and then come home and bring you to your mom and dad, and you got a second spanking. So everybody was family. We could play until dark, the days when you were out playing. And then when it got to be dusk, you need to be in the yard. No matter where you were, you had to, when my mom called you, you need to be close enough so that you heard her call you and you come home. There was a baseball park. Those of you, Jackson probably know where Bungie is. There used to be a baseball field, and my brothers played baseball. So we would sometimes go to the baseball game in the evening. And of course, since my dad sold coal, there were often people that came to get it at our house. But there was a grocery store right across the street from our house, and he was Syrian. And in the back, they also did whatever you do with geese. They did that. But we got along well. We played in the street. We played croquet with with cans. You stack them up. Wolf All River. We played all those things with the kids in the neighborhood. There, Eli's Family Center was straight up the street from my house. So if you wanted something like that, you could go up there and get something from there. Of course, I told you the grocery store was right over there. And a funny thing is, I don't know why I can remember this so well. My mom made biscuits from scratch all the time. But by the time we came, she was making fewer biscuits. So if we were to go over to Johanna's store, that was the name of the store, and get 2 cans of biscuits, and he would charge a penny tax. And we would say, Daddy, it's 20 cents. It was 10 cent, 10 cent. And then he said, just go in there and get 1 can, go up now and go get another can. So my brothers and I we would try to find pennies so we wouldn't have to do that. A very central part of our life was, of course, church. On on Sundays, of course, we always went to Sunday school. We had morning worship, and then at 6 o'clock, we always went to Baptist Training Union. We talked. My younger brother and I talked about this yesterday. The Wizard of Oz came on once a year on Sunday at 5 o'clock. Baptist Training Union was at 6 o'clock. So we always missed the last hour forever. So we were so glad if it were canceled, so we could actually see the whole things. And we weren't allowed to go to the movies or anything like that on a Sunday. So church was a central place for us. I try to remember my granddaughter that is 7 said, Granny, where did you ever go on a vacation? I never went on a vacation. I never, and they have something called Storyworth, and they send you these 52 questions, one each week. And one of the stories I wrote was the first long trip I remember taking was when my grandmother died, my dad's mom. And I can remember her actually coming to visit us, but she wasn't a nice lady, as, as I remember. And, I know it's hard for y'all to believe that I asked questions then too. And I can remember her coming, and we had one bathroom, and she had real long hair, and she was brushing her hair, and I was sitting on the commode and asking her questions, and she'd say something, and I said, well, why is that? By the third time, and I said, why? She looked at me, rolled her eyes, went out of the bathroom and slammed the door, and our dining room was right there, and my dad was eating. She said, Kurt, where you get this little girl to ask so damn many questions? And in my mind, I thought, that's not very grandmotherly like. But anyway, when I was 12, she died. And so that was my first long trip. We drove to Michigan. And I can remember my dad crying. He would have been 52, first time I'd ever saw my dad cry. And I thought, why is he crying for that mean woman? But, that was the only really long trip I remember taking. I remember the train station was at North Carroll. sometimes my dad would take people out there and he would let us ride with them. And the coolest thing that I can remember growing up is going to the coal mine. It was in Harrisburg then, and everybody got a chance to go with Daddy, but you got to go just you, and that was really pretty cool. And he would always give us something that Mama said we couldn't have. Don't you tell your mom. So, crazy? No, we wouldn't dare to tell my mother. But with that, and I tell this story because number 7, my brother, was a senior in high school, and he actually went to get a load of coal. The brakes went out on the truck, ran into a viaduct, and when they found him, his ankle was sticking outside of his left foot. Um, and I'm sure my family probably didn't have insurance. He was in the hospital in Marion, and he was there. I can't remember how long he was there. I would have been small, but I can remember him coming home in a cast. And one Sunday morning, we had bedrooms in the basement. We had a basement, and he was crying. He told my mom it hurt so badly and it itched. And so my mom, you have to know my mom too. She was quiet, but boy, she was a powerful little lady. She told my dad, when we come home from church, I'm gonna cut that cast off. And my dad kind of looked funny, but we had dinner. She cooked the whole bit. And when we came home, after we cleaned the table off, she told my dad, go get the saw out of the shed. And he did. You talk about people going like flies. I was afraid, but I wanted to see. So she did. She cut it off, and it was just blew up. She took him to the hospital the next day, and they immediately sent him to a children's hospital in Chicago. And he ended up having TB on top of everything else for a long time. So he graduated a year later. And later, as a result of all of that, he became an alcoholic. He moved to California with my sister and my brother. And he was out there in less than a year, and a truck hit him. And he lost that leg. And they cut his leg off 4 inches below the knee, which is really kind of interesting. And I can remember my mom, when he was an alcoholic, just praying and asking the Lord, if you take both of his legs, his arms, whatever, but I want him to come back to you. And it was after that he really did. So it's really kind of interesting how those kinds of things happen. My mom was really big on, she didn't drink, she didn't do any of that, just a real stalwart in the neighborhood. And she and 4 or 5 other women had a quilting circle. And it wasn't just for a hobby, it was for cover. So, in the spring and the summer, once a week, they actually did a quilt. They had the horses at the end, and they roll it and do all that. So I have one of those quilts that my mom made, which was really pretty cool. As just like with my siblings, as the children grew up, they don't want to stay in Cairo. It was very little for them. And so they started to leave. And then as that happens, even at the high school, those white kids whose parents didn't want them with black kids started Camelot. And they had just white people went to that school. And then you start to have fewer things at your school, fewer offerings given to the people at the school. And little bit by little bit, no one staying in this house, nobody stayed in this house. And many of the houses were shotgun houses. And so they were torn down. We didn't live in a shotgun house because our family was so big. And so consequently, after a while, there's no one there. And so, yeah, it did start to change. Not Juneteenth. The one thing I can remember is 4th of July. You always got new clothes for the 4th of July. Always. And our house, we lived on the corner, and next door to us were the Jacksons, the Martins, and then the Moody's. The Moody's were our good friends. And Mrs. Moody and Mr. Moody were both drinkers and smokers. Well, my mom and dad were not. But Miss Moody also liked to fish. And so her daughter, who was 3 years older than I was, asked my mom if I could go fishing with them on this 4th of July. And so we did, had on our little cute little clothes and our flip-flops, and we went to wherever it was. Somebody said it was Four Corners. I can't remember that. But, you know, in Cairo, there was a swimming pool. But of course, they wouldn't let black people swim in it. So rather than let us swim, they filled it in. So when we went to do our little fishing expedition, wherever this was, we like to take a can and get minnows. And we would use them as hood goldfish. We came home. Well, this particular day, Sandra and I and another one of our friends, Brenda, we had gone, and Miss Moody and her friend were down there, and we just went right around the bend, and we were doing that, and we were. Sandra was going for the fish, and she dropped her flip flop in the water, and so she got this long stick to pull it out, and she fell in. Nope, she couldn't swim. So I'm her good friend. So I got the same stick to pull her out, and she pulled me in. And we were just yelling and screaming and yelling and screaming. But as God will have it, you know, they had the long weeds on the side. And so we were able to get out. But in the meantime, our friend was up there just laughing. She thought we were playing. And Miss Moody came, and oh Lord, it was such a mess. She made us go back down to where she was. And it was real hot. And of course, she made us sit there until we dried. But that was one of the things we did, was to go fishing with her mom and catch minnows. But we never told my mom that, because my mom would never have let me go back more. So she never knew that story. Well, my dad sold coal. Uh, no, I can't. Well, no, that's not true. Um, no, I don't remember. There was a man that, his name was Billy Walton. He would go to Chicago and buy things, and then he sold them from his car. There would be the black barbershops, of course, beauty shops. Um, Other than that, I can't remember any. No. Well, they had a place called Cavalier Club, and it was kind of for professionals. It was actually started by teachers, black teachers, and it was on Commercial. Um, and of course, if you had like when we had our family reunion, our first family reunion in 1976, that's where we rented that out to have it. That was more for the more high society. My sister would say hoity-toity, but that's not really true. And then 4th Street was a tavern, and a lot of black people. That was a black business, but it was a tavern. When my older siblings were in high school, when they had the black high school Sumner, it was like a little gyp joint. That's what I call it. Right across the street, they sold hamburgers and things like that. And they had a jukebox and the kids danced, but that wasn't there when I was there. And across the street, they had something comparable to that, and I can't remember what they called that. But by the time I was in high school, that was no longer there. When I was in high school, other than going to the movies, some kind of game, some kind of football game or basketball game, and I was in the band. Um, I don't remember a lot of things. Those kids whose parents allowed them to go out. By the time I could date, um, uh, I didn't go on a date by myself with 3 brothers at home. If they went somewhere, that's where my boyfriend and I had to go. I'm just saying. But those kids that had cars and went somewhere, there was a it's a tavern, kind of like they had on 23rd Street, that the kids would go there. But of course, my dad would never let us go there. I was a good kid. I was scared that he would actually hurt us. Of course. Oh, yeah. Could you expand on that? On Poplar, Washington was kind of like I guess they call it Martin Luther King Drive now, but it was kind of like the dividing line. The area over where St. Mary's Park is, I can actually remember when blacks weren't allowed to be at St. Mary's Park. My mom actually worked for one of the white people that owned a law firm, I think. She worked in the house. She was one of their little people. And when the when we would come from the high school was in that area, basically it was mostly white. And so when you walked home, you're walking through those areas, but you're coming back to the black neighborhood, of course. Yeah. And then, when people started to leave, more blacks were then starting to buy those properties because they no longer want to live there. And one of the things when I remember when I graduated from college in '75 from SIU, and when I got out early, we were on quarters then, and I worked at the Land of Lincoln as a secretary for Charles Cohen's wife. She was having their youngest child. And I remember a guy coming in saying, uh, they're selling all the houses. There goes our neighborhoods. Because blacks were starting to buy houses on the white side. It was different for different people. Believe it or not, my dad was just he's very well known, very well respected. He wasn't a yes or no sir kind of guy. He just wasn't. He was a yes, no. And he always taught us that you're no better than anybody else, but you're no worse. So you don't have to do that. Um, as I told you in high school, there were people in high school that always acted like they were better than you were. Uh, and I think initially it takes you aback because I never really dealt with any white people other than going to Lewis Brothers store or to Eli's Family Center. Just those people you didn't, but you just learn. No, but then there were some who were some black people that it was just like, I just don't like you cause, and so then that would always cause that automatic. It'd just be awful. And even in high school, I can remember the principal was a man that was kind of, can't even think of his name right now, but he was interesting in that he would take kids in there and just sit down and talk and let them talk it out. My brother played football, um, and by the time that was his senior year, and sometimes they had problems with white boys trying to hit the black boys harder. And then, of course, then it became a real problem because then the black boys decided, oh, no, you don't do that. By the time my youngest brother graduated from high school, which was '75, it's really kind of funny because um, the principal that was there knew me, and he had called home one day when I was home for a break. And he said, this is whatever his name was. He said, Donnie is here. And they had the style then was to wear coveralls or overalls. And one of the things was down, they have, remember that? But he also wore house shoes. I know everybody does that now, but that wasn't so hip back then. And he said, and so we've told him not to do that. And he and three other boys still did it. So he's going to be suspended for the rest of the day. He said, we need somebody to come and get him. Daddy wasn't home, Mom wasn't home, so I got in the car and went and got him. And when he came home, he said, don't tell Daddy. I said, you're not going to get me in trouble. And of course, when my dad came home, he wanted to know, what kind of shoes are those called? He said, house shoes. What do you wear? House shoes. you know. But for him, his memory of high school was quite different than mine. There were not as many black teachers at the high school when he was there than it was when because many of the high school, the teachers from the black schools came over to the middle school and the high school. So it's just kind of interesting how you see things. I really can't tell you that. I don't know. I don't know. One of the things that I was going to mention is that when my brother, my oldest brother that's living now, the 87-year-old, married a German girl and came home, and white people brought coal for my dad, But when he came home with the coal, with this girl, they stopped buying coal from my dad because, of course, he had this white girl there. And of course, my dad's thing was, if they don't want to, the hell with them. But I can remember, um, I can remember the first time the superintendent of schools was a black guy. I was in college. I was stunned. His dad also worked for the police department. His last name was Thomas. I can remember that. But he became superintendent of schools in Cairo. And that was probably one of the first, other than a teacher. Of course, we had black doctors, Dr. Chambliss and Dr. Robinson. But I was talking to my sister the other day, and I can never remember going to the dentist except to get a tooth pulled. I don't ever remember really going to a dentist. Um, no, I cannot remember. And there might have been some, and the black teachers were very encouraging. I can really say that, especially if they thought you had potential. There were just things that they would, no, you don't do that. And they would pull you from that group because that's not where you belong. So the professionals that I knew best would have been in education. Well, I was trying to think of the name of that guidance counselor in my high school year. It was a man and a woman. Both of them were guidance counselors. And when she asked me what did I want to do, I said, I want to be a lawyer. And she said to me, oh, you can't do that. You can't be an attorney. And it's interesting to me that I never went home and told my mom nor my dad that. I never told them. Um, and so when we talked about what are you going to do, my dad was going to, at the end, you see all your children leaving. He was going to buy me a new car if I went to Shawnee, which of course is junior college. Well, of course, I want to be able to go away and see what I really know, be by myself. And so I said, no, Daddy, I don't want to do that. So that's how I ended up coming to SIU. I lived in the dorm. Um, but then, you don't realize how homesick you're going to be. So when my dad I lived in Neely, and they have this little circle. And on Fridays, if I was really homesick on my dad's way home from the coal mine, he would drive that big truck in the circle and come pick me up. And I was so happy to see him. And then, of course, on Sundays, he would bring me back in the car. And I can remember being in my freshman year. That was the year that streaking was a big deal. And I thought, that was so crazy to me. It was I didn't realize how naive I was until I came to college. I, 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 I was a nerd. I loved to read. I'd done lots of research on drugs, but I'd never smelled marijuana. And I remember being on the elevator with a girl from East St. Louis, and we were and it was full. I said, "Oh, what is that smell?" She kept pinching me out. Why are you pinching me? We got off the elevator. She said, "Did you live under a rock in Cairo?" I said, "No." She said, "Girl, that's reefer." I said, "Oh, I didn't know." That was the first thing. And the second thing I think I remember was when they were building, it's not WAM, it's that other long building. And the thing fell on a young man and he died. I remember that, and that was a big deal. I wasn't really big on sets because I wasn't much of a dancer. If it wasn't the bump with a real strong beat, I couldn't really do it. And if I liked the slow dance, but if the man wasn't real good and a good lead, I'd take him all over that floor. I was a nerd in college. I did well in college. And then, as I said, I graduated a little earlier, went home and worked. And then I went to California and stayed for almost 6 months. And then I came back and I worked at Meridian. in Mounds. I got married, worked in Meridian, and it's really kind of that. Once again, you think you know a lot, but then I started in fifth grade with fifth grade, and then they had it was in Mound City, and you could see the outside from the inside. So they went on double shifts, and then I worked at the high school. But I learned because I always taught my dolls. So I felt like that's how I ended up going into special ed. But I ended up never really teaching special ed. But I always felt like I was good at what I did. Um, so when we came to when my husband at that time and I moved to Carbondale because it was closer to, he worked at Menard and I worked at Meridian then. But then when I got pregnant with my first daughter, I thought, I don't want to commute. So I said I would just work in Walmart, is what I said. But anyway, I ended up getting a job in Carbondale at one of the schools. And I liked it. I learned that I really liked to teach. And so I retired after 36 years. I was in the classroom for 29, and the rest of that, I was dean of students at the middle school. Now that I'm retired, I at first I volunteered for CASA, which was like court appointed uh, persons, and I really liked it. But then I went to Little Egypt or whatever that little town is, and the man pulled a gun on me. That ended that. I didn't do that anymore. And then I started to volunteer for Alzheimer's because my mom had Alzheimer's. And so now that's what I do. I volunteer for Alzheimer's quite a bit. I speak for them. I just came back from Atlanta last week. I spoke at a national conference. My mom had Alzheimer's. My oldest sister had Alzheimer's. And I have a sister presently with Alzheimer's. So it's important to me. I think knowledge is power, the things that we need to do as a people. It happens to Black people more, women even more than white women. And so that's what I do with my time now. Oh my gosh. I didn't know kids didn't like their mothers till I came to college. And if you could imagine, when I was born, my mom was 40. I can remember on my block, most of the parents were younger. The women were younger. So I can remember my mom telling us about menstruation, 5 girls plus me around my table. She was just that kind of cool person. In Sunday school, when I was in high school, she was our Sunday school teacher. And we had some of my friends and I on a chat, a group chat. And she would, before the Sunday school class started, she always had a get it off your chest period. And whatever was going on, she pretended like she wasn't listening. And then when she started the Sunday school class, whatever she talked about, it wove that in there. She was just such a cool woman. She got her GED. She was in 10th. She finished school. She got out of school when she was 10th grade because when she was in 10th grade, she was smart enough that they wanted her to teach younger kids. So that's what she did. But she got her GED when I was a senior in high school. And she learned to drive. Now, she had 12 kids. She didn't learn to drive until I was a senior because everybody was leaving. And she wanted to learn to drive. She was just a real catalyst. My dad was like, but she was like the slow, quiet storm. My dad really thought a lot of times he was running things. And I can remember when I got married the first time, and I said, don't you just get tired of Daddy always saying, I'm the head of this house? She said, honey, no head does anything without a neck, which was really pretty cool. Cool to me. And, as far as discipline is concerned, she wasn't a big spanker, which back then, I wish she had been. She was just, oh, Yolanda, I'm just so disappointed in you. I can't believe you would do that, that kind of thing. And she would give you a little scripture. She was just really a cool person. So when I got to college, and my best friend's name was B, and she would always say, I hate my mother. And I just wouldn't say anything because I didn't have anything to say. I didn't. My mom was just the best ever. And I, even when I do my Alzheimer's programs, and I tell them, I know we have 12 children, but she always said she had 12 only children. And I said, I loved my mom, but I liked my mom. She was just somebody you would like. I would have liked her had she not been my mom. She was just awesome. And so on the 24th of September of every year, we have, as a family holiday for us, we call it Random Act of Kindness because that's kind of the woman she was. So we always do something on our Facebook page. We always share what we've done. Well, the gym theater, first of all, just because I worked there at a time when there was no one else there that looked like me. And the woman that worked with me in concessions, that's what I did, was an older white woman that was really kind. The manager at that time was a young man that I think wanted to be progressive, and he too was very kind. It could have been, excuse me, a very ugly situation, but it wasn't. School was always important to me. Even those kids that were just kind of bad and mouthy, I don't like that. I really wanted to learn. Um, I was never a sports person, and they tease me about that now, even when we go back for class reunions, because if the softball is coming too fast, I don't care. I'll let it fall. That ain't what I do. I don't want to hurt. I don't want to hurt my hand. And they always say, Yolanda, you always did that. I said, and my best friend, of course, was always, how the PE teachers get somebody that's going to be the lead, be the one to choose. And I said, don't choose me. I'll just take the score. And she'd choose me every time. And everybody else on the team always hated it. But school was a big deal. Church was a big deal. I liked to sing. We had my oldest sister graduated from college and came back, and she taught at Washington Grade School for a year. And she bought a piano for my sister that was closest in age to me because she wanted to take piano lessons. And of course, when she graduated from high school, there's a piano being paid for, and nobody to play. Nobody asked my brothers if they wanted to play piano. So guess who had to take piano lessons? They hated it. Me. So I have that piano in my house now. But from those things, being exposed to even singing at church in the choir, being able to play melodies, I'm still not good at the piano, but it laid a path for me to help my girls. I have two daughters, and both of them are quite musical. One of them is a worship leader at the church, and the other one teaches music. But I learned that at home. I still like that. I still love the library. I do. Not this one in Carbondale, but I do. I love the library. I still like to learn, and I learned that in Carroll. My mom, I remember my mom and dad, and my mom was the leader of this, getting encyclopedias. I know, girls, you probably don't even know what they are, but we had encyclopedias, and they had to pay like $1 a month or something. It was something they really couldn't afford. But other kids from the neighborhood would come to our house to use the encyclopedias and watch TV because no, we didn't have color TV, but they would come over our house to watch TV because many of them didn't have it. My dad, it was a big deal to him for us not to be on welfare. We were never on welfare, and that was a big deal to my dad. So for me, my parents and my family life so shaped who I am.
Gym theater.
Mm-hmm.
Any other?
Garrison School. That's where I got my penny stuck in the first grade in that little desk. The library. This is really funny. I still think the library is awesome. If you've ever been to the library in Carroll, my dad would let me go there and just read. And one time he came to pick me up, and I didn't. They said that I wasn't there, And if you have been to the library in Carroll, if you go to the left, there's a little bathroom. I got stuck, the door wouldn't open. And so they locked the door and everybody left. And so when my dad came, the librarian used to live right in the house behind the library. And my dad said, "We're going to back to the library. My daughter's in there. She would not have left on her own." And so when my dad, they opened the library, and of course my dad was yelling my name, and I was, "Daddy!" And of course, in the end, of course, he came and got me out. So the library still holds a place in my heart in Carroll. And then of course, I think I said the church, the thinker, that was a big deal. The point, we would go down there sometimes, and the levee, that was a big deal. When I came to Carbondale and they called the levee over on the northeast side where they sell liquor and stuff, I was looking for water. But so those places are very special to me. It's really quite sad to go and see it. It's really sad. Our home is still standing, but because my sister refuses to sell it. She needs to, but she doesn't. It's the only house on the block. To go and see the houses deteriorating, it's really quite sad to me. I don't like it. I don't like that. And I was telling you about the little kids asking me, and they say, "You're from Carroll?" Absolutely. Absolutely. It shaped who I am. Not just Carroll itself, but the people on my block, teachers that I remember, teachers in my Sunday school, and I had two of the teachers at my church were also my teachers in school. So it made such an impact on me. And as a result of that, for me, that's what I want. That's always what I've wanted as an educator, to be able to pass that on to those after me. I'd like to see it thrive again. I'd like to see the high school and the middle school not be 70 kids. One year I went back to speak to them. It's really sad. I think I'd like for it to not be just a few white kids and the black kids. It goes back to the same thing where you don't have that interaction where you know each other and recognize each other to be the awesome people that you can be. I'd like to see housing, and it's not just for a particular group, that housing that's safe for everybody, where everybody has an opportunity to thrive. And right now, I know they're talking about, right now they're talking about the Riverport coming. And whenever I hear it, I get this little flip in my stomach, because I always wonder, for whom will that profit? Who will get the benefit of that? And that sometimes just concerns me. Carroll is in serious need of revamping itself, reinventing itself now, because it isn't the Carroll I knew. Well, after a while, when they see you're not going to acquiesce to what they're doing, they came back. They came back. And um, I think sometimes, back in my time, white people didn't like to see men that stood up. When my mom and dad came from Gray Ridge, Missouri, they had 3 children, and my mom was pregnant. They were on a truck. My dad always tells, I know this so well because my dad always tells us at family reunions. And they had 3 children already, and my mom was pregnant. In a truck, everything they had was there. But he would say he was tired of being a sharecropper. And so he had what he always said and wanted for us, a bulldog tenacity to actually reach the goal you set. So when he went, he didn't even know anybody. He didn't know where they're going to stay. I said, "Daddy, had you ever been to Carroll?" He said, "No." But they met this man, Mr. Jewell, who I later, we always met him and we always called him Uncle Jewell. He let them stay with them for a week. And my mom and dad were able to get a house. And that's how it started. He started with that truck. He was really, my dad was He could calculate in his head faster than many people can with a calculator. And Solomon Junkyard used to be in Cairo, and he would haul metal for him, and he would do. It always reminds me of the stories they have in the books about um, sharecroppers, and they were the ones that calculate how much money you're supposed to have, and they always teach the black people. Well, that didn't work well for my dad. And I have a sister that lives in California who is as math conscious as my dad. She was a math major. But anyway, the two of them together, and sometimes Solomon would get it wrong, and he would go down with my sister, and they'd show him how he had gotten it wrong. My dad was just, he was, as you said, a great entrepreneur. He was just really a man before his time. I always say if he had a degree, he would have been so much more than what he ended up being. But it's pretty super to me because he was my dad. My brothers didn't want to do that. Now, all of them, this is what's funny, all of them except my brother Lloyd, all owned a truck. But, and there wasn't an option for you to work with my dad. But the cool thing is, even with the during the cold and all of that, during football season, he made it so that they would still be able to participate in extracurricular activities, and which was really good. And then you talk about, this is funny, once my dad retired, my brothers got together with him and bought a farm in Pulaski County, and he wanted to raise hogs. Yeah. So he did that for about 10 years too. My dad was just kind of a interesting guy. What to say? Oh no, I mean like cover for your bed.
Okay.
Quilts,
Okay.
quilts.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't like just for to be in a museum.
Gotcha.
And there would be, of course, they made it out of. She has that shirt on. Once it was too little and nobody could wear it, they just cut it up into little quilt pieces, and that was part of what I did as a little girl. She had have you to cut the pieces up and then make the quilt. I would say it would be Garrison School, which was up the street from my house. We always walked to school. And I can remember, this is not necessarily about the school, but it happened at school. Um, Johanna's store was on Poplar. Our address was 3114 Poplar. So we were on the corner, and then this was Johanna's store. And there are like 4 or 5 houses that were like shotgun houses on the other side of the store. And then, of course, you get to school. And we always played on the playground. My birthday is November 23rd. And John F. Kennedy was killed on my birthday. And I knew he was the president, but everybody was so sad. But I mean, I think I was 10. And I can remember thinking, oh my God, this is going to go down in history. I'm going to always remember this birthday. Well, that didn't always happen, but I can remember that part, being on the playground. And when the principal came out and told us, of course, they didn't have a megaphone or anything. So she came out there and made everybody sit down on the ground, which first was kind of nasty because, we didn't wear pants to school. And even when I was in high school, it was so cold and you had to wear pants, you wore pants to school, and then you went in the bathroom and took them off. Anyway, we were sitting on the ground, and that's when the principal told us. And some of the kids, the bigger kids that were in 6th grade, of course, knew who he was, and they were crying. And so all of the little kids, we just cried because they cried because we didn't know. That was one of the stories I can remember at Garrison. And the other one is when I was in 2nd grade, the teacher's name was Miss Washam. And the boy, we come in from recess. I can't remember what Terry did. His name was Terry Jones, and we called him TT. I don't recall what he did, and this will traumatize you guys, but we had paddles. They had paddles. And whatever it was he had done, she told Terry to come up and lean across this chair. And he refused to lean across the chair. So she sat in the chair and had him across her lap. And she spanked him one time with the paddle. And he stood up and she stood up and he took the paddle from her and hit her. Oh man, the whole classroom just was in an uproar. And of course, she sent him to the principal's name, was Mrs. Rowlett. And the 6th grade teacher was always the principal. And of course, Terry had to go home. But that night at dinner, we always ate dinner together. So if my dad was working on a truck, whatever, we usually ate about 6 o'clock. And we were all around the table, and no radio or TV could be on because my dad believed that you find out what happened during the day if nothing was on. And so when it got to me, I would say, you know what happened in school today? And Titi hit the teacher with the paddle. And we were laughing. Just said, that ain't funny. So he said, it wasn't funny. And, of course, that was a lesson. If there's something happening at the school, that's not your job to take care of it. You tell your mom and me, and don't laugh at stuff like that. So those kinds of things resonate with me. And in third grade, when the space shuttle, they spent the first space shuttle to the moon, Miss Chambliss bought a little bitty TV. It was about this big, to school, and everybody sat on the floor. I mean, we could hardly see it. And when we went home, and I was telling that at the dinner table, my dad never believed anything went to space. But fourth grade, I love biographies, and the teacher's name was Miss Clark, and she knew I liked to read, and so she would let me stay after school to read books. She would call my mom and say, Yolanda's here, and she's going to help me she let me help other kids do. And I think that was where my desire to teach kind of came from. But, it was just like that. And I could go through each one of my grades at that school. I remember Garrison best because those teachers were, I guess they treated us kind of like they were our children, that we were their children. And so when I pass it now, and some of the windows are broken, and I just want to go and look in the rooms that I liked most, and it would be first grade, second grade, and fourth grade. Those were. My dad didn't like, just like he didn't like Solomon telling him what to do. He liked to be his own man, and he said they were often trying to cheat him. And then his dad in Arkansas apparently had a real kind of blowout with the white man when they were sharecropping, and my dad would have been probably a teenager, which is why they ended up moving to Missouri. And I guess it would, when you have that, is in his word, when you have that in your craw, that's not what you want to do. And so once he made his mind up, and I asked my mom, I said, well, did you really want to go? She said, I didn't really want to go. She said, but your dad was adamant, and he really felt like he could do it. She said, and he had a strong work ethic, so I knew we could make it. And that's how he ended up going to Carroll. The Thinker. The Thinker. That's the statue where the guy is doing like this.
Okay.
Yeah. That was really kind of cool for us. And walking, actually, I don't know if you can remember this, but in Carroll on 8th Street, they had, they've moved it now to that little place where you go around, but they had the bricks with the memorial bricks on it. My parents, we did that for my parents to do that. And that was really kind of cool, even for my children, to take them down there to show them that. So one of the reasons I participated in this project was because I just think for Black people, oral history is being lost. We no longer tell the story. So with the story worth that my daughter gave me as a gift, what I do is I've written those stories with pictures, and now I'm on my second book. And when I go to Texas, I have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. I have grandchildren. I read the stories to them because I want them to know they had an awesome grandma and granddad, and they didn't know them. From the stories that I know about my dad's dad and my mom's dad, it's kind of like, yeah, I come from that. And that's what I want my babies to know. You come from a line of people that had their own minds. They didn't have to do it just like everybody else did it. And you eke your own path. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate you.